This is Just to Say by William Carlos Williams. I have eaten the plums that were in the icebox, and which you were probably saving for breakfast. Forgive me, they were delicious, so sweet, and so cold. Huh? I understand, because that was the exact reaction that I had after reading this poem. I wasn't even sure this was a poem, and I really didn't know what this was supposed to mean. To this question, the person who introduced me to this poem said,
"The plum is good."
well, that was his answer. And obviously, the plum was good. But I thought that there should be something more to it, so I read it over and over. But before I talk about the things that I thought about this poem, let's first dig into the specifics. When we look at this poem looks like a perfectly normal poem. However, when we read this poem out loud, we can immediately realize that this poem does not sound like a poem at all. However, this poem still does have some poetic elements to it, and I will point some out to you. First of all, we have some alliteration. When we look at the first stanza first, the plums that were in the icebox, we have alliteration here. Moreover, when we go here, there is so sweet and another so here. And since the two so's are repeated, we can also consider this as repetition. We can also find some patterns in the meters. For example, we have I am, and these I ams can be found from the second and fifth line. The plums and which. As you can hear, the first meter or syllable of the two lines were unstressed while the second one was stressed more. And we also have amphibrach from this poem, which can be found from the 8th and 9th line. Amphibrach is when the meters go unstressed, stressed, and unstressed. So the 8th and 9th line read, for breakfast, forgive me. So we can notice that brek was stressed and give was stressed. When the author was asked the question, what makes this poem a poem, he said that the meters had complete regularity. However, anyone in AP literature would know once they read it that this poem does not have a regular meter. Only these four lines have some kind of pattern in their meters. Now let's see what the internet says about this poem. Surprisingly, this poem could have many meanings, including, well, I never knew that a plum could have such meanings, but through the interpretations of the poem that doesn't really sound like a poem, I figured out a key role of poems and also a unique characteristic of human beings. Let's say you saw this sticky note on your refrigerator. What would you think? Well, certainly I wouldn't think that the sticky note will have any meaning to it. I will just think that simply this somebody ate my plums, and I wouldn't worry whether this plum can mean something or the icebox can symbolize something. However, because we know that this is a poem, or at least we are told that this is a poem, we try to find meaning in it. So, what I'm trying to say is that sometimes we put in meanings just because we know that we have to put in meanings to it. Honestly, I didn't really like this poem at first. I was just interested in it because it was so different. And I guess because of this interest and because it was so different, I started to explore it more. And the more I thought about it and the more I researched about it, I realized that maybe this poem had the true characteristics of a poem, because Many times in literature, we learn that there is no fixed meaning, that anything can be the answer. However, most of the time, there are usually set answers that people expect or set answers that people accept. And I think that is not the case for this poem. And I like that the meaning of the poem is still controversial, even though it is very important to use all those poetic elements and beautiful words. Essentially, if the poem does not make the reader think, and if the poem does not talk to the readers, I don't think that that poem is a true poem. I really wondered why, out of all of the delicious fruits, why the author picked plums. So I associated the plums with the color purple. Now the next question was, why purple? Usually the color purple is associated with luxury and royalty. It can also indicate overly embellished literature or pretentious literature. There can be two purposes in the use of plums. One purpose can be the author used plums to symbolize people in the modern day society. These days, people live in more luxury and they are simply richer. And this will later relate to the fact that plums are in the icebox. Another purpose can be that the author was poking fun at all of the other authors that were using unnecessarily hard or complicated grammar structures or very fancy words. When we look at the poem, it is very simple, and perhaps he was trying to make his point by making his poem simple to show the other authors that it is possible for you to write without being complicated and fancy. The plum was in the icebox and people live in their own boxes. These days people tend to be isolated more even though they are surrounded by many people. They have their own boxes and they are trapped in it. Compared to a long time ago, people these days do not communicate with others that much, and simply we are isolated and estranged. And this can be supported by the fact that the plums were not in just any box but an ice box. The author could have said fridge, however when we compare the two words fridge and icebox sounds a lot colder because of the word ice. And also the sense of isolation is bigger because of the word box. The word cold usually has a negative connotation, or at least in this poem it was used in a negative way. Since I thought that plums symbolize people, the plums being cold can mean that the people are cold. Finally, we have to pay attention to the fact that this poem is in a note form. Notes usually don't show much emotion and don't really contain much emotion, just like people nowadays. People these days try to make everything short and concise and to the point. Consequently, their communication and interaction is becoming more mechanical and less emotional. I mean, just look at all the text messages and brief emails that we send to each other, unlike what people used to do. In short, I thought that this poem was talking about the aloofness and isolation of people. I guess the author wanted us to be warmer and to not be cold plums.